Have you ever wondered what might happen if the worst night of your life turned into the beginning of your greatest love story? Come with me, and I will tell you about Yuna Park, a woman whose heart was shattered on the eve of her wedding, only to find herself in the arms of a stranger who would change everything she believed about love and destiny. The rain fell in thick sheets over the glittering streets of Gangnam, transforming the upscale neighborhood into a blur of neon lights and streaming water. Inside the Shilla Hotel, one of Seoul's most prestigious venues, the final preparations for what was supposed to be the wedding of the season were underway. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across tables dressed in ivory silk, and towering arrangements of white roses and peonies filled the grand ballroom with their heady perfume. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as Park Yuna had dreamed since she was a little girl, sketching wedding dresses in the margins of her school notebooks. The wedding coordinator, a meticulous woman named Mrs. Han, who had organized over 500 ceremonies in her career, moved through the ballroom with her clipboard, checking and rechecking every detail. The ice sculptures had arrived, 2 magnificent swans with their necks intertwined to form a heart. The string quartet was setting up in the corner, tuning their instruments with the quiet concentration of professionals. The caterers had begun laying out the appetizer stations, each dish a small work of art that would soon be consumed by the 400 guests expected to arrive within the hour. Upstairs, in the bridal suite that overlooked the hotel's famous rose garden, Yuna stood before the full-length mirror, her reflection a vision in hand-sewn French lace. The gown had taken 6 months to create, each bead individually placed by artisans who understood that this dress was not merely fabric and thread, but the embodiment of every romantic hope Yuna had ever harbored. The bodice hugged her slender frame before cascading into a full skirt that seemed to float around her like a cloud. The cathedral-length veil, secured with a diamond tiara that had belonged to Minho's grandmother, trailed behind her like a whisper of promises yet to be fulfilled. At 32 years old, Yuna felt like she had finally achieved everything she had worked so hard for. Growing up in a modest apartment in the working-class neighborhood of Dongdaemun, she had watched her parents struggle to make ends meet. Her father had worked as a bus driver for 30 years, and her mother had taken in sewing to supplement their income. They had never been able to afford the private academies that prepared other children for success, but they had given Yuna something more valuable: the belief that she could achieve anything through hard work and determination. She had earned a scholarship to study interior design at Hongik University, where she had graduated at the top of her class. She had built her small design firm from nothing, taking on projects that larger companies rejected, slowly building a reputation for innovative design and meticulous attention to detail. And 3 years ago, she had met Choi Minho at a charity gala, the heir to a mid-sized construction company who had pursued her with a persistence that had eventually worn down all her defenses. Her mother, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of elegant bearing that came from decades of navigating life's challenges with grace, adjusted the cathedral-length veil one final time. Mrs. Park wore a hanbok in deep purple silk, traditional attire that honored both the occasion and her daughter's achievement. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at her only child. "You look like a princess from one of those dramas you used to watch," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father would have been so proud. He always said you were destined for great things." Yuna felt the familiar ache that came whenever her late father was mentioned. He had passed away 3 years ago, just months before she met Minho, his heart giving out after decades of working double shifts to provide for his family. Sometimes she wondered if her grief had made her more susceptible to Minho's persistent charm, more eager to grasp at the promise of a new family, a new chapter. His warmth had filled a void she had not even known existed. But she pushed those thoughts aside. Today was not a day for doubts. "I wish he could be here," Yuna whispered, touching the small locket she wore beneath her dress, which contained a photograph of her father and a lock of his hair. "He is here," her mother said firmly. "He's watching over you from heaven, and he's smiling." "Sujin, Yuna's best friend since their university days and her maid of honor emerged from the bathroom where she had been doing a final check of her makeup. She wore an elegant champagne-colored dress that complemented Yuna's gown, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate updo decorated with tiny pearl pins. "Has anyone heard from him?" Yuna asked, checking her phone for the 20th time. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 45 minutes, and Minho had been unreachable for the past 2 hours. His phone went straight to voicemail, and none of his groomsmen seemed to know where he was. Sujin exchanged a glance with the other bridesmaids that Yuna pretended not to notice. There was something in that look, something that made Yuna's stomach tighten with unease. But before she could question it, Sujin's expression shifted back to reassuring warmth. "I'm sure he's just dealing with some last-minute groomsman crisis," Sujin said, her voice a touch too bright. "You know how Minho is about making sure everything is perfect. He's probably fussing over a crooked boutonniere or something." The other bridesmaids nodded in agreement, perhaps too quickly. There were 5 of them in total, women Yuna had collected over the years from various chapters of her life. Hyejin from university, Minji from her first design internship, Yunseo from the yoga class she had taken 3 years ago, and twins Jiyeon and Jimin, who were Minho's cousins and had been included at his mother's insistence. Something cold had begun to curl in Yuna's stomach, a premonition she desperately wanted to ignore. She had noticed things in recent months, small inconsistencies that she had explained away with the stress of wedding planning. Minho's phone always face down on tables, his sudden late nights at the office, the way his assistant Yoonji seemed to smirk whenever she brought them coffee during planning meetings, as if she knew a secret Yuna did not. "I need some air," Yuna said suddenly, gathering her voluminous skirts. "I'll just walk to the garden terrace for a moment." "In your dress?" Her mother's eyebrows rose with concern. "Yuna, yeah. The photographer will be here any minute, and it's starting to rain outside." "Just 5 minutes, Iyama. I need to clear my head." Without waiting for further protests, Yuna slipped out of the bridal suite, navigating the hotel's elegant corridors with the ease of someone who had spent weeks planning every detail of this venue. Her heels clicked against marble floors as she made her way toward the garden terrace, but a wrong turn led her down an unfamiliar hallway. She was about to retrace her steps when she heard it. A laugh she would recognize anywhere, the sound that had first made her fall in love. Minho's laugh, low and intimate, coming from behind a partially open door. Yuna's feet moved before her mind could stop them. Something deep inside her, some instinct she had been suppressing for months, propelled her forward. She pushed the door open, and the world as she knew it crumbled into dust. Minho stood with his back to her, his groom's tuxedo jacket discarded on a nearby chair, his crisp white shirt pulled untucked from his trousers. His arms were wrapped around a woman in a red dress, a woman whose face Yuna could not see but whose body language spoke of long familiarity. They were kissing with the kind of passion that spoke not of a stolen moment, but of an established affair, the kind of intimacy that develops over months, perhaps years. Minho. His name left her lips as barely more than a whisper, but it was enough. He turned, and Yuna watched the color drain from his handsome face. For a moment, he looked like a stranger, all the warmth and charm she had loved stripped away to reveal something calculating underneath. The woman in his arms turned too, and Yuna felt a second blow strike her heart, harder than the first. Yoonji, his executive assistant, the woman who had helped Yuna plan every detail of this wedding, who had smiled and offered suggestions about flower arrangements and seating charts, who had held Yuna's hand when she cried with stress over the guest list. And all the while, she had been sleeping with the groom. "Yuna, wait, I can explain." Minho stepped forward, his hands raised as if approaching a wounded animal. "This isn't what it looks like." A laugh escaped Yuna, harsh and broken, the sound of something shattering inside her that would never be whole again. "It looks like you're kissing another woman on our wedding day, in the hotel where 400 guests are waiting to watch us exchange vows, where my mother is right now, crying with happiness because she thinks her daughter has found a good man, Yoonji had the decency to look uncomfortable, though not enough to leave the room. She simply stepped back, adjusting the straps of her dress, watching the scene unfold with the detached interest of someone who had already won. There was no guilt in her eyes, Yoona realized. Only triumph, poorly concealed beneath a veneer of embarrassment. "It just happened," Minho said, and Yoona could hear the lies layered beneath his words like sediment. "The stress of the wedding, the pressure from my mother about merging the companies, everything just became too much. Yoonji understands the business world. She understands me in ways that don't." Yoona held up her hand, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when everything inside her was shattering into a million pieces. "Don't make excuses. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this is new. Don't you dare try to blame your mother or the wedding stress for your betrayal." She looked at them both, really looked, and saw the truth she had been refusing to acknowledge for months. The late nights at the office when Eunji always seemed to be working too. The way Minho's cologne sometimes carried traces of a perfume that was not Yoona's. The subtle changes in their intimacy. The way he had become distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere even when his body was present. "How long?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like the calm before a storm. Minho's silence was its own answer. He could not even look at her, his gaze fixed on the floor like a child caught in a lie. "How long?" This time her voice cracked, the facade of composure beginning to splinter. 8 months, Yoonji said calmly, stepping forward with an almost defiant tilt of her chin. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Yoona. These things just happen. You can't control who you fall in love with." 8 months. They had been engaged for 12, which meant that for 2/3 of their engagement, while Yoona had been planning their future, choosing wedding invitations and taste-testing cakes, and dreaming about their first home together, Minho had been building a different future entirely. Every time he had told her he loved her, every time he had held her and promised forever, he had been lying. "You knew," Yoona said to Eunji, her voice hardening. "Every time we sat together planning the seating chart, every time you helped me choose flowers, every time you smiled and told me how lucky Minho was to have me, you knew you were destroying everything." Yoonji shrugged, a gesture so callous that Yoona wanted to scream. "I was trying to give him time to figure out what he wanted. He was confused." "He wasn't confused." Yoona looked at Minho, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. "He was a coward. He wanted both of us, and he was too weak to make a choice." Without another word, she turned and walked away. She heard Minho call her name, heard his footsteps behind her, but she did not stop. She walked through the hotel's grand lobby in her $10,000 wedding dress, past the arriving guests who stared in confusion, past the flower arrangements and the ice sculptures and all the trappings of a celebration that would never happen. Some guests tried to stop her, calling out congratulations before their words died on their lips as they registered her expression. Others pulled out their phones, sensing scandal, already composing messages to share the drama unfolding before them. She walked out into the rain. The water hit her like a baptism, soaking through lace and silk, plastering her carefully styled hair to her face. The elaborate updo that had taken 2 hours to create collapsed in seconds, dark strands streaming down her back and shoulders. The makeup she had applied with such care ran down her cheeks, mingling with tears she had not even realized she was shedding. She did not care. She walked without direction, without purpose, her only goal to put as much distance as possible between herself and the ruins of her dreams. The streets of Gangnam blurred around her as rain fell harder, transforming the upscale neighborhood into a watercolor painting of neon and shadow. Luxury boutiques and towering glass buildings became smears of light through her tears and the storm. She did not know where she was going. She did not know who she was anymore. Everything she had believed about her future, her identity, her worthiness of love, had been ripped away in a single devastating moment. Her wedding dress grew heavier with each step, the layers of silk and lace absorbing rain until moving felt like wading through deep water. The elaborate train dragged behind her, collecting debris from the sidewalk, becoming streaked with mud and discarded cigarette butts. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she recognized the irony. This dress that had cost more than her parents had earned in a year, reduced to a sodden rag in less than an hour. At some point, she discarded her heels, leaving them on a street corner like offerings to some god of broken hearts. Her bare feet slapped against wet pavement, the cold seeping into her bones. People passed her, most hurrying by with their umbrellas, too focused on their own destinations to pay attention to a woman in a wedding dress walking through a thunderstorm. A few stopped to stare, some pointing, others pulling out phones to capture the strange sight. She ignored them all. How had she not seen this coming? The question circled in her mind like a vulture waiting for wounded prey to finally stop struggling. She was supposed to be intelligent, perceptive. She designed spaces that reflected people's deepest needs and desires. How had she failed so completely to see the truth about the man she was about to marry? The rain continued to fall, colder now as evening approached, and Yuna began to shiver so violently that her teeth chattered. Her body was betraying her, demanding attention she could not spare. All her energy was focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on moving away from everything she had lost. She found herself at the base of Bukansan, the mountain that rose on the northern edge of the city. She had hiked here many times with Minho, laughing and holding hands as they climbed to the peak. Now, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a naive woman who no longer existed. This is how I die, she thought with strange detachment, frozen and heartbroken on the outskirts of Seoul, wearing a wedding dress that will never see a wedding. The tabloids will love it. Excuse me. A male voice cut through the rain, and Yuna looked up to find a stranger standing before her, holding a large black umbrella. He was tall, perhaps 10 centimeters taller than her, with sharp features softened by genuine concern in his dark eyes. He was dressed in a simple but obviously expensive black coat, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of old money rather than flashy new wealth. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Yuna laughed, the sound jagged and wild, more sob than humor. "Do I look all right?" The stranger tilted his head, considering her with an intensity that might have been uncomfortable under other circumstances. Despite her disheveled state, despite the mascara surely running down her cheeks and the wedding dress that marked her as either a runaway bride or a woman in crisis, he did not look at her with pity. His gaze was steady, curious, almost appreciative, as if seeing past the disaster to something worth noticing underneath. "You look like someone who could use a warm drink and a dry place to sit," he said simply. "There's a traditional hanok nearby where I'm staying. It's quiet, private. You could warm up and wait out the storm." Every instinct Yuna had developed as a single woman in a big city told her to refuse. She did not know this man. Following him anywhere would be foolish, potentially dangerous. Her mother had drilled safety awareness into her since childhood, and every news story about missing women flashed through her mind. But another part of her, the part that had just watched her life collapse in spectacular fashion, whispered a different message. What did she have left to lose? Her dignity was soaked and dragging through the mud behind her. Her heart had been shattered beyond repair. Her faith in love and in her own judgment lay in ruins. Besides, there was something in this stranger's eyes that made her feel safe. It was irrational, inexplicable, but as real as the rain streaming down her face. "I don't even know your name," she said. He smiled, and she noticed for the first time that his smile was slightly crooked, one corner of his mouth rising higher than the other. It made him look younger, more approachable, less like the polished professional his expensive coat suggested. "I'm Jamin, just Jamin for tonight. And you?" Yuna. She did not offer her family name either. Tonight she decided she would be no one. Not a jilted bride, Not a betrayed fiancé. Not a woman whose carefully constructed life had just been demolished. Just Yuna, a woman caught in the rain. "Well, just Yuna," Jameen said, extending his hand. "Will you come?" She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm despite the cold, and something about the contact sent an unexpected spark through her frozen limbs, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than pain. She followed him through the rain, her bare feet splashing through puddles that had become small rivers in the Seoul streets. They walked for perhaps 15 minutes, weaving through narrow alleyways she had never explored despite years of living in this city. The storm seemed to follow them, thunder rumbling overhead like the universe itself was commenting on the drama of her situation. Finally, they reached a beautiful traditional Korean house tucked away on a quiet street, hidden from the modern city by an ancient stone wall covered in moss and climbing vines. The hanok was clearly old, but meticulously maintained, with curved tiled roofs that gleamed in the rain and wooden lattice windows that glowed warmly from within. Jamin led her through a wooden gate carved with images of cranes and clouds, symbols of longevity and good fortune that felt almost mocking given the circumstances. They entered a small courtyard garden, where a gnarled pine tree stood sentinel beside a stone lantern, its flame somehow still burning despite the rain. The courtyard was paved with smooth stones worn by centuries of footsteps, and the air smelled of wet earth and the faint sweetness of rain on pine needles. "My grandmother's family built this house 200 years ago," Jamin said as he guided her toward the main building. "I stay here when I need to escape." "Escape from what?" Yuna asked, her curiosity momentarily overriding her misery. Jamin's smile turned rueful, carrying shadows of his own pain. "From being who everyone expects me to be." The answer resonated with something deep inside her, some understanding that perhaps this stranger was not so different from herself. She too had spent her life trying to become who others expected her to be, the successful daughter who would elevate her family, the perfect fiancé who would make Minho proud. He slid open the wooden door and ushered her into a room that felt like stepping back in time. Ondol heated floors radiated warmth beneath her frozen feet, the ancient heating system still functioning after centuries. Traditional silk screens painted with mountain landscapes divided the space into intimate areas, creating the illusion of multiple rooms within one large space. Antique furniture sat alongside modern comforts, creating a harmony of old and new that spoke of careful curation over generations. Yuna's designer's eye automatically cataloged the details. A Joseon-era blanket chest with mother-of-pearl inlay, celadon vases that might be genuine Goryeo dynasty pieces, painted screens that depicted scenes from classical Korean literature. This was not a recreation of the past for tourist consumption. This was a living history, a home that had been loved and maintained by generations of a family that valued their heritage. "Wait here," Jimin said. "I'll find you something dry to wear." Left alone, Yuna stood dripping onto the pristine floor, feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She could not process what had happened. Just hours ago, she had been the happiest woman in Seoul, standing in her dream dress, about to marry the man she loved. Now she was standing in a stranger's ancestral home, wearing that same dress like a funeral shroud, while somewhere across the city, 400 guests were probably learning that the wedding was off. Her mother would be devastated, confused, explaining to relatives and friends that something had happened. Sujin would be fielding calls, trying to manage the disaster. And Minho was probably still with Yoonji, relieved that he no longer had to choose between them. Jimin returned with a stack of clothing, traditional Korean garments in soft blue silk that shimmered in the lantern light. "These belonged to my grandmother. She was about your size, I think. The bathroom is through there." Yuna changed mechanically, peeling off the ruined wedding dress and leaving it in a sodden heap on the bathroom floor. She did not want to look at it. She did not want to think about the hours of fittings, the excited discussions with the seamstress about exactly where each bead should be placed, the way she had cried with joy when she first saw herself in the mirror wearing it. That woman felt like a stranger now, naive and foolish, and painfully hopeful. The handbag fit surprisingly well, the joggery jacket falling just past her waist with sleeves that covered her hands, the chima skirt flowing gracefully to her ankles. She had not worn traditional clothing since Chuseok celebrations as a child, when her father would dress in his one good hanbok, and her mother would prepare the ancestral table with offerings of fruit and rice cakes. The familiar weight of the garment was oddly comforting, connecting her to a simpler time when she had believed in fairy tales and happy endings. When she emerged, Jamin had prepared tea, 2 delicate cups steaming on a low table beside a tray of traditional rice cakes and dried persimmons. He had changed as well, trading his expensive coat for simple traditional clothing in gray and white. Without the trappings of modern fashion, he looked timeless, like he could have stepped out of any century of Korean history. "Sit, please." He gestured to a silk cushion embroidered with peonies. "You're still shivering." Yuna sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup he offered. The tea was green and fragrant, exactly what she needed, warming her from the inside out. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued to drum against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound that made the rest of the world feel very far away. "You don't have to tell me what happened," Jamin said finally. "But I find that sometimes it helps to tell a stranger what we cannot tell the people who know us." And so Yuna told him. She told him about Minho and the 3 years of their relationship, about how he had pursued her with a persistence that had seemed romantic at the time, but now felt more like calculated determination. She told him about the proposal on Namsan Tower, with the city glittering below them like a sea of earthbound stars, about how she had cried and said yes without hesitation. She told him about the months of wedding planning, the arguments with his mother who never thought Yuna was good enough, the growing sense that something was wrong, that she had steadfastly ignored, because she was afraid of what she might find if she looked too closely. She told him about walking in on her fiancé and his assistant, about the cold calculation in Yoonji's eyes, about walking into the rain because she did not know what else to do. She told him about her father, who had worked himself to death to give her opportunities, and how she felt she had failed him by choosing so poorly. She told him about her mother, who was probably at this very moment trying to explain to 400 guests why there would be no wedding. She told him things she had never admitted to anyone, fears and insecurities that had been building for years. Jamin listened without interrupting, his expression attentive but not pitying. He did not offer platitudes or advice. He did not try to minimize her pain or suggest silver linings. He simply listened, his dark eyes focused on her face, giving her the gift of being truly heard. When she finished, her tea had gone cold, and the rain had softened to a gentle patter. Jamin was quiet for a moment, as if absorbing everything she had shared before speaking. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Not because you lost him, because clearly he never deserved you. But I'm sorry for the pain you're feeling, and for the dream you lost." "I feel so stupid," Yuna whispered. Everyone probably knew. His mother certainly did. She always looked at me like I was temporary, like I was a phase he would eventually outgrow. "You're not stupid for trusting someone you loved. That's not a flaw, Yuna. That's what makes you human." Jamin refilled her teacup with fresh tea, the steam rising between them like incense. "The only person at fault here is the man who betrayed your trust. He made vows to you, promises. You had every right to believe him. But I should have seen it. The signs were all there." "Were they? Or are you looking back now with knowledge you didn't have then, judging your past self unfairly?" Jamin's gaze was gentle but penetrating. "I've found that we're much better at seeing patterns after we know what we're looking for. That doesn't mean we should have seen them before." They talked for hours, as the rain gradually softened and eventually stopped outside. Yuna learned that Jamin had also experienced betrayal, though he spoke of it in vague terms that suggested the wounds were still healing. He had been engaged once, he told her, to a woman who had loved his family name more than she had ever loved him. "I thought she was perfect," he admitted, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Beautiful, accomplished, the daughter of a family my parents approved of. I was ready to build my whole life around her. What happened? Jimin was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his teacup. My father and I had a disagreement about the direction of the family business. I wanted to pursue more sustainable practices, invest in green technology. He thought I was being naive and idealistic. When I refused to back down, he cut me off from the family fortune. Temporarily, he said, until I came to my senses. And your fiancé? She ended our engagement within a week. She said she had realized we weren't compatible, that she needed someone more stable. His laugh was hollow. What she meant was that she needed someone with immediate access to money. The idea of waiting, of struggling while I proved myself right, was not something she was willing to accept. So you understand, Yuna said softly. I understand what it feels like to realize that someone saw you as a means to an end, rather than a person to be loved. Jimin's dark eyes met hers, and she saw her own pain reflected there, transformed by time into something more like wisdom. But I also learned that such people do us a favor by revealing themselves. Better to know the truth than to build a life on lies. At some point, Yuna realized she had stopped shivering. Warmth had returned to her limbs, and something that felt almost like peace had settled over her spirit. Perhaps it was the tea, or the comfort of the hanok, or simply the relief of being with someone who expected nothing from her. Perhaps it was something more, some connection forming between two wounded people who recognized in each other a kindred spirit. It's getting late, Jamin said, glancing toward the window where the rain had finally stopped and the clouds were beginning to part, revealing a sliver of moon. You're welcome to stay. There's a guest room prepared, and I promise I'm far too tired to be anything but a gentleman. Yuna should have left. She should have found her way back to reality, faced her mother's worried questions and Sujin's sympathetic hugs. She should have begun the painful process of picking up the pieces of her life. But reality felt very far away, and the thought of returning to it was unbearable. I'll stay, she said. Thank you. That night, Yuna slept more deeply than she had in months, lulled by the unfamiliar quiet of the hanok and the knowledge that here, in this place out of time, no one expected her to be brave. She had thought she would lie awake all night, tormented by visions of Minho and Eunji, replaying every moment of their relationship and searching for signs she had missed. Instead, she fell asleep almost instantly, exhaustion claiming her before her mind could begin its torture. But sometime in the small hours of the morning, she woke to find herself in Yamin's arms, though she could not remember moving from the guest room. Perhaps she had sought comfort in her sleep, her subconscious leading her to the only source of warmth in this unfamiliar place. Perhaps he had heard her crying out from a nightmare and come to offer solace. Either way, she found she did not want to leave. What happened between them was not planned, but it felt inevitable, like two rivers finally meeting after flowing separately for miles. Jamin touched her with a tenderness that Minho had never possessed, as if she was something precious rather than something owned. There was no possessiveness in his touch, no agenda. Only gentle exploration, two people seeking comfort in each other's arms, finding in physical intimacy a respite from the loneliness that had defined their lives. When morning came, gray light filtering through the paper screens to paint geometric patterns on the floor, Yuna felt changed in ways she could not articulate. The pain was still there, would be there for a long time. But she felt lighter somehow, as if some portion of the weight she had been carrying had been lifted during the night. I should go, she said, though every part of her wanted to stay in this suspended moment forever. Jamin nodded, his expression unreadable as he watched her gather the borrowed clothes she had been wearing. I understand. But Yuna. He caught her hand as she moved to rise, his grip gentle but compelling. Last night meant something to me. I want you to know that. It meant something to me, too." She squeezed his hand, memorizing the warmth of his skin, the calluses on his palm that spoke of a man who worked with his hands despite his obvious wealth. "But I need to figure out who I am now, before I can be anyone to someone else. I hope you understand." "I do." He released her hand, but did not look away, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But I hope our paths cross again someday. I believe they will." Yuna left the hanok wearing his grandmother's borrowed hanbok, the ruined wedding dress stuffed into a bag Jamin had provided. She did not leave her phone number or ask for his. Some connections, she told herself, were meant to be brief, beautiful, and ultimately left behind. Like shooting stars, they burned bright for a moment and then were gone. She was wrong, of course, but she did not know that yet. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Yuna's life. She returned home to find her mother waiting, having been up all night after learning what had happened. Sujin had fielded the immediate crisis, explaining to guests that the wedding was cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances, a phrase vague enough to inspire endless speculation, but specific enough to communicate finality. The scandal was everywhere. Seoul's society pages devoted endless columns to speculating about what had happened, with sources close to the couple offering contradictory versions of events. Some said Yuna had discovered Minho's affair and fled. Others claimed she had experienced a mental breakdown and run away in a fit of hysteria. A few suggested that she had been the unfaithful one, that Minho was the victim of a gold digger who had gotten cold feet when she realized he wasn't wealthy enough. Yuna ignored it all. She took a leave of absence from her design firm, citing personal reasons, and spent 2 weeks in her apartment, emerging only for essentials. She slept too much and ate too little. She watched every Korean drama she could find, losing herself in stories of love and redemption, while her own love story lay in ruins. But eventually, she had to face the world again. Bills needed to be paid. Clients were calling with questions about delayed projects. Her mother was worried about her health. And somewhere deep inside, the part of Yuna that had built a career from nothing refused to let her wallow indefinitely. 3 months after the wedding that never was, Yuna returned to her studio with renewed determination. She threw herself into work with an intensity that surprised even herself, spending long hours at her design firm, channeling her heartbreak into creative energy. Every project became an opportunity to prove that she was more than a jilted bride, more than a cautionary tale whispered at society parties. Word of her canceled wedding had spread through Seoul's social circles with predictable speed. But Yuna refused to hide. She attended industry events with her head held high, letting the gossips see that she had not been destroyed. When people stared or whispered, she met their gazes directly, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her shame. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of her residential projects, a renovation of a hanok in Bukchon into a modern living space that honored traditional Korean aesthetics, caught the attention of a prestigious design magazine. The editor, a formidable woman named Kim Hyerim, who had been covering Korean design for 3 decades, was impressed by Yuna's innovative approach. "You've managed to do something remarkable," Editor Kim said during the interview for the feature article. "You've modernized traditional Korean architecture without losing its soul. Most designers either create museum pieces that no one can actually live in, or they strip away everything traditional to make generic modern boxes. You've found a third way." The article was published to considerable acclaim. Suddenly, Yuna was receiving calls from clients she could only have dreamed of before, established families who wanted their ancestral homes updated without losing their heritage, corporations seeking to incorporate Korean aesthetics into their offices. And then came the inquiry that made her heart race. Kang Group, one of the largest conglomerates in South Korea, was looking for a designer to reimagine their corporate headquarters. "This is huge," Sujin said when Yuna told her about the meeting. They were at their favorite pojangmacha, a small street food tent in Hongdae that they had been visiting since their university days. The owner, a grandmother everyone called Halmoni Lee, remembered their usual order and had already brought them soju and grilled pork belly before they even sat down. Kang Group is massive. This could put your firm on the international map. I know. Yuna twirled her glass, watching the clear liquid catch the light from the single bulb that illuminated their table. I'm terrified. You're going to be brilliant. Sujin clinked her glass against Yuna's, the sound bright in the evening air. That bastard Minho did you a favor by showing his true colors before you married him. You're more focused than I've ever seen you. Yuna thought about the past 3 months, about the nights she had cried until she had no tears left, about the mornings she had forced herself out of bed through sheer willpower. She thought about the Hanok and the stranger named Jaemin, whose face she saw sometimes in her dreams. She had emerged from her heartbreak not stronger exactly, but perhaps more honest. She knew now what she wanted from life, and more importantly, what she would never again accept. The Kang Group meeting was scheduled for the following week, at their headquarters in Yoido, the financial heart of Seoul. Yuna spent days preparing, creating presentation boards that showcased her vision for a space that honored the company's heritage while projecting innovation and warmth. She researched the company's history, learning that they had started as a small trading company in the 1950s and grown into a conglomerate with interests in shipping, construction, technology, and hospitality. She studied their existing spaces, identifying what worked and what felt dated. She practiced her pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep, anticipating every possible question. The morning of the presentation, she dressed with care, choosing a structured white blazer over a fluid black dress, an outfit that projected both creativity and professionalism. Her hair was swept back in a sleek chignon, and subtle gold jewelry caught the light when she moved. She looked, she thought, as she surveyed herself in the mirror, like a woman who knew exactly who she was. Kang Group's headquarters was a towering glass structure that dominated the Yoido skyline, its reflective surface capturing the sun and casting light across the Han River. Yuna was escorted to a conference room on the executive floor, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city she had called home her entire life. She set up her presentation materials while waiting for the executives to arrive, her heart beating a steady rhythm of anticipation. The door opened, and Yuna turned with her most professional smile prepared. The smile froze on her face. Jaemin stood in the doorway, looking at her with an expression of pure shock. But he was not dressed in the simple casual clothes she remembered from that rainy night. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that screamed executive power, and behind him, a retinue of assistants and managers filed into the room. On the presentation screen that someone had already set up behind her, the words Kang Corporation, Executive Presentation, glowed in corporate blue. Kang Jaemin. The name rearranged itself in her mind, and suddenly everything made terrible, wonderful, complicated sense. Kang Group. Jaemin. Not just Jaemin, a stranger who stayed in his grandmother's hanok when he needed to escape. Kang Jaemin, the only son of Kang Sung-hoon, one of the wealthiest men in South Korea. The heir to an empire worth billions. Kang Jaemin? The name left her lips as a whisper, and she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the moment he understood that she had finally put the pieces together. Yuna. He recovered faster than she did, his expression smoothing into professional neutrality, even as his eyes told a different story, burning with an intensity that made her stomach flutter despite the inappropriate circumstances. Please, continue with your presentation. We're all very eager to hear your vision for our headquarters. Somehow, Yuna found her voice. Somehow, she delivered the presentation she had practiced so many times, pointing out design elements and discussing material choices while her mind raced with implications she could not begin to process. She spoke about blending traditional Korean aesthetics with modern functionality, about creating spaces that honored heritage while projecting innovation. She discussed sustainable materials and energy efficiency, employee wellness, and collaborative workspaces. The other executives asked questions, made notes, nodded approvingly at her answers. She could feel them being won over by her vision, by her obvious expertise and passion. But through it all, Jimin watched her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight for her body, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When the presentation concluded, the executives filed out with murmurs of approval and promises to be in touch. But Jimin lingered, dismissing his assistant with a wave of his hand, until only the two of them remained in the conference room. "You didn't tell me who you were," Yuna said, and she hated that her voice wavered with something that was not quite accusation, not quite wonder. "Would you have stayed if I had?" He moved closer, stopping just out of arm's reach. "Would you have trusted me, talked to me, let me see who you really were? Or would you have seen the family name and the net worth and kept your guard up, the way everyone else does?" Yuna wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. If she had known that night that she was talking to one of the most eligible bachelors in Korea, a man whose face regularly appeared in business magazines and society pages, she would never have been so honest, so vulnerable. She would have performed the version of herself she showed to powerful people, polished and professional, and utterly false. Their connection would have been impossible. "That night meant something to me," Jamin said, echoing words he had spoken 3 months ago in that same gentle voice that made her heart ache. "I've been looking for you ever since. Do you know how many design firms I've consulted in the past 3 months? How many portfolios I've reviewed, hoping one of them would be yours? This is crazy." Yuna pressed her hands to her temples, trying to impose some order on her racing thoughts. "I just delivered a business presentation to you. This is completely inappropriate." "I know." He smiled, and there was that crooked tilt again, the one that made him look younger and more approachable, less like a corporate titan, and more like the man who had made her tea in his grandmother's house. "But I don't care about appropriate. I care about you. I've cared about you since you stood in the rain in your wedding dress, looking like the saddest, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Against her better judgment, Yuna laughed. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. 3 months ago, she had given herself to a stranger, seeking comfort in the arms of someone who asked nothing of her. Now that stranger stood before her, offering her everything, and she had no idea what to do. "I need time," she said finally. "This is too much, too fast. I just got out of a relationship and I'm still figuring out who I am." "Take all the time you need." Jamin's expression softened, and she saw the patient, understanding man who had listened to her pour out her pain without judgment. "I've waited 3 months to find you again. I can wait longer, but Yuna..." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something warm and woodsy that transported her instantly back to that rainy night. "Don't shut me out because you're afraid. I'm not Minho. I would never hurt you the way he did." He left her standing in the conference room, her carefully constructed professional composure in shambles. Through the window, she watched his reflection in the glass as he walked to the elevator, and she wondered how her life had become more complicated than any drama she had ever watched. In the weeks that followed, Yuna tried to maintain professional distance. Kang Group awarded her firm the contract, a decision she suspected had as much to do with Jamin's influence as her talent, though he insisted he had recused himself from the final vote. She threw herself into the work, determined to prove that she had earned the opportunity through merit rather than personal connection. But Jamin made distance difficult. He appeared at her office with coffee and the excuse of discussing design choices, lingering long after any business questions had been answered. He sent flowers with notes that referenced conversations from that night at the Hanok, reminders that he remembered everything she had told him. He attended industry events he had never shown interest in before, always ending up by her side, his presence a comforting warmth she could not help but lean into. He was patient, respectful, never pushing for more than she was willing to give. But his attention was constant, a reminder that the connection they had shared was not something either of them could easily forget. The gossip started almost immediately. The heir to Kang Group, notoriously private and previously rumored to be engaged to various heiresses from important families, was suddenly very interested in an interior designer of modest background. Society columnists speculated about their relationship, trying to connect the dots between the canceled wedding and this new romance. Paparazzi began appearing at Yuna's office and outside her apartment, cameras flashing as they shouted questions she refused to answer. The attention was overwhelming, and Yuna found herself reaching for her phone more than once to tell Jaemin to stop, to let her disappear back into anonymity. But she never made the call. Because every time she saw him, every time he looked at her with those dark eyes full of something she was afraid to name, she remembered how it had felt to be truly seen. Not as a suitable match, like she had been for Minho, but as a person worth knowing. "You're falling for him," Sujin observed one evening over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Hongdae, a place small enough that no paparazzi had discovered it yet. "I can see it in your face every time you say his name." "It's complicated," Yuna replied, pushing food around her plate without appetite. "Love usually is." Sujin leaned forward, her expression serious. "But Yuna, from what I can see, this man adores you. He's not trying to change you or fit you into some mold. He's just trying to be with you." "His mother will never accept me. I'm no one, Sujin. I have nothing to offer their family. No connections, no wealth, no prestigious lineage. You have yourself." Sujin reached across the table to squeeze Yuna's hand. "And if that's not enough for them, then they don't deserve you." The truth of those words echoed in Yuna's mind as she made her way home that night, walking through the familiar streets of the city she had called home her entire life. She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with a figure standing outside her apartment building. When she looked up, her blood ran cold. Minho stood under the streetlight, looking rumpled and anxious, nothing like the polished businessman she had almost married. His normally immaculate hair was disheveled, his designer suit wrinkled as if he had been wearing it for days. "Yuna, please. I need to talk to you. We have nothing to discuss." She tried to move past him, but he blocked her path. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I've regretted it every day since." His eyes were bloodshot, and she could smell alcohol on his breath. "Yoonji meant nothing to me. It was just cold feet, wedding jitters. I never stopped loving you. Minho, please move. I heard you've been seeing Kang Jaemin." His voice turned bitter, poisonous. "Is that what this is about? Trading up? I wasn't rich enough for you, so you found someone with a bigger fortune? Is that the game you were playing all along?" The accusation was so absurd that Yuna almost laughed. "I didn't even know who he was when we met. Unlike you, I don't choose people based on their bank accounts." "Then give me another chance." Minho grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to hurt, his fingers digging into the flesh above her elbow. "We were good together, Yuna. We can be good again. Just forget about what happened and come back to me. Let go of me." Fear flickered in her chest, but she kept her voice steady, refusing to show weakness. "We're done, Minho. We were done the moment I found you with her. I won't let you go that easily." His grip tightened, and Yuna was suddenly very aware of how dark and quiet the street was, how far away the nearest light seemed. "You're mine, Yuna. You've always been mine." "She asked you to let go." The voice came from behind them, calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Jaemin stepped out of the shadows, his expression cold and dangerous, every inch the powerful man he was. "I suggest you do so immediately." Minho released Yuna's arm, his face cycling through shock, anger, and finally a calculating sort of awareness. "Kang Jaemin, the rich boy himself, come to rescue your little project? Leave, now." Jaemin positioned himself between Yuna and her ex-fiancé, his body language communicating a clear threat. If I see you near her again, you'll find out exactly how much influence my family name carries in this city. For a moment, Minho looked like he might argue. But whatever he saw in Jamin's eyes convinced him otherwise. He backed away, hands raised, his smile ugly. This isn't over. She'll figure out eventually that you're no different from me. You're all the same, you Chibol types. He disappeared into the night, and Yuna finally let herself tremble. Jamin turned to her immediately, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face for signs of harm. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? I'm fine. But her voice shook, betraying her. How did you know to be here? I was coming to see you. I wanted to. He shook his head, the words trailing off. It doesn't matter. What matters is, you're safe. He walked her upstairs, waiting patiently while she fumbled with her keys, her hands still shaking from the encounter. When she finally got the door open, she turned to thank him and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart ache. I know you need time, he said quietly. But I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Not while I'm around. The words undid something in her, some final barrier she had been maintaining against the feelings that threatened to overwhelm her. She reached up, cupping his face in her hands, and kissed him. It was different from that night at the Hanok, less desperate, more intentional. She was not seeking comfort or escape. She was making a choice, a conscious decision to let this man into her heart, despite all the risks. Stay, she whispered against his lips. He stayed. What followed was not smooth or simple. Jamin's mother, the formidable Mrs. Kang, requested a meeting that felt more like a tribunal. Yuna was escorted to the family's residence in Cheongdam-dong, a modernist mansion that managed to be both coldly beautiful and intimidatingly expensive. Mrs. Kang surveyed Yuna across a tea table in the formal sitting room, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer hanbok projecting old money and older traditions. Everything about her radiated control, from the precise arrangement of the teacups to the way she held herself, spine straight as a sword. You must understand my concerns, Mrs. Kang said, her voice pleasant, but her eyes sharp as a hawk's. My son is the heir to a considerable legacy. The woman he marries will carry significant responsibilities. With respect, Mrs. Kang, Jamin and I have not discussed marriage. Yuna kept her spine straight and her voice steady, refusing to be intimidated. We're simply getting to know each other. Are you? Mrs. Kang's eyebrow arched with elegant skepticism. Because the tabloids suggest otherwise, and I've learned that you were previously engaged to Choi Minho, whose wedding you fled in rather dramatic fashion. I discovered my fiancé was unfaithful on our wedding day. I'm not sure how my response to betrayal reflects poorly on my character. A long silence followed. Yuna forced herself to meet the older woman's gaze, refusing to look away or apologize. Whatever happened, she would not grovel for acceptance she did not need. She had spent too much of her life trying to fit into spaces that were not designed for her. She would not do it again. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Kang smiled. It was a small thing, barely a quirk of the lips, but it transformed her face from forbidding to almost approachable. You have a backbone. Good. My son needs someone who will stand up to him rather than simply agree with everything he says. He's surrounded by sycophants who tell him what he wants to hear. It's made him soft in some ways. I'm sorry? Don't misunderstand me. I still have concerns, and I will be watching. Mrs. Kang sipped her tea with perfect elegance, every movement precise. But I raised my son to make his own choices. If he's chosen you, then I'm willing to give you a chance to prove yourself worthy of this family. It was not a warm welcome, but it was not a rejection either. Yuna would take what she could get. Months passed, and the relationship between Yuna and Jamin deepened into something real and sustainable. He supported her work, celebrating her successes without trying to overshadow them with his wealth or connections. She learned to navigate his world, attending galas and board dinners with increasing confidence. They fought sometimes, as all couples do, about work schedules and family expectations and the constant intrusion of the press, but they always found their way back to each other. The project at Kang Group headquarters became a stunning success, transforming cold corporate spaces into warm, innovative environments that reflected both tradition and progress. The main lobby featured a massive installation inspired by traditional Korean screens, modern materials arranged in patterns that echoed ancient designs. Meeting rooms incorporated natural light and living plants, creating spaces that promoted creativity and collaboration. Industry publications praised Yuna's vision, and her firm received more inquiries than she could handle. She hired new designers, expanded to a larger studio, and began teaching occasional classes at her alma mater. The girl who had once sketched wedding dresses in her notebook margins had become a woman who created spaces where people could thrive. On the anniversary of that rainy night, Jaemin brought her back to the hanok. The traditional house looked exactly as Yuna remembered, the gnarled pine tree standing guard in the courtyard, the warm glow from the paper screens inviting them inside. They sat where they had sat that first night, drinking tea from the same delicate cups. But everything else had changed. A year ago, I found a woman in the rain who looked like her heart had been broken, Jaemin said softly. Tonight, I'm sitting with the love of my life, the most brilliant, beautiful, stubborn person I've ever known. Yuna felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine ever being happy again. And now? She looked at him, at this man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who had pursued her with patience and respected her need for time, who had proven through consistent actions that she could trust him with her heart. Now I can't imagine my life without you, she said. Jaemin smiled, that crooked smile she had come to love, and reached into his pocket. The ring was simple and elegant, a single diamond set in a band of traditional Korean gold filigree. It was nothing like the ostentatious ring Minho had given her, and it was perfect. I'm not going to ask you to marry me, he said. And Yuna felt a moment of confused disappointment before he continued. Not yet, because you told me once that you needed to figure out who you were before you could be anyone to someone else. So instead, I'm asking if you'll continue figuring it out with me, if you'll let me be there while you become whoever you're meant to be. And when you're ready, if you ever are, I'll be here with this ring, waiting. Yuna took the ring from his hands and looked at it, the diamond catching the lantern light and throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a shattered bride to a successful businesswoman, from a woman who didn't know her own worth to one who would never again accept less than she deserved. Ask me, she said. Are you sure? Ask me, Kang Jaemin. I've figured out enough to know that the person I want to be is your wife. He asked. She said yes. The wedding was held at the hanok, intimate and meaningful, nothing like the grand society affair she had once planned. Yuna wore a traditional hanbok in deep burgundy silk, the same color as the leaves on the pine tree in the courtyard. Her mother cried happy tears. Sujin served as maid of honor again, and this time there was no anxiety, no sense of impending doom. When Jaemin lifted her veil and looked at her, Yuna saw everything she had ever wanted in his eyes. Not wealth or status or social approval, but love. Simple, profound, unconditional love. I will spend every day making sure you never regret this, he whispered. I already know I won't. The reception was small, a gathering of people who genuinely loved and supported them. Mrs. Kang had softened considerably over the months, and she embraced Yuna with genuine warmth. 1 year later, Yuna stood in the nursery of their home, a converted hanok that blended traditional architecture with modern convenience. The design had been her passion project, creating a space that honored their shared love of Korean heritage while providing every comfort for their growing family. She rested her hands on her rounded belly, feeling the flutter of movement that had become her constant companion. Through the window, she could see Jaemin in the garden, his sleeves rolled up in a way that still made her heart race after all this time. She thought about where she had been 2 years ago, a woman so desperate for love that she had almost married a man who didn't deserve her. She thought about the rain and the ruined wedding dress, and the feeling that her life was ending. How wrong she had been. Her life hadn't been ending. It had been beginning. The door slid open, and Jaemin appeared, his face lighting up when he saw her. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That night, the rain, you finding me. If you hadn't been there, if I had walked a different direction. But you didn't. And I was." He kissed the top of her head. Some things are meant to be. Yuna had never believed in fate before. She had believed in hard work and careful planning. But standing in the nursery of the home she shared with the man she loved, carrying the child they had created together, she wondered if perhaps there was something more. Either way, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning when the maple trees in the courtyard had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, Yuna gave birth to their daughter. They named her Hana, which meant one in Korean and flower in Japanese, a name that honored both the uniqueness of their love story and the beauty that had grown from their chance meeting. The delivery had been long and difficult, but Jaemin had stayed by her side through every contraction, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When Hana finally emerged, crying lustily, and was placed on Yuna's chest, both parents wept with joy. "She has your eyes," Jaemin whispered, tracing the delicate curve of their daughter's cheek. "And your stubborn chin," Yuna laughed through her tears. The first weeks of parenthood were a blur of midnight feedings and exhausted smiles, of discovering that love could expand infinitely to encompass this tiny new person who had joined their family. Yuna found herself marveling at the ordinary miracles of each day. Hana's first smile, her tiny fingers wrapped around Yuna's thumb, the way she calmed instantly when placed in her father's arms. Mrs. Kang, who had once seemed so formidable and disapproving, was transformed by grandmotherhood. She arrived at the hanok almost daily, bearing gifts and advice, holding Hana with a tenderness that revealed depths Yuna had never suspected. "She looks like Jaemin did as a baby," she would say, her voice soft with memory. "I still remember holding him just like this." Even Minho's shadow had finally faded from their lives. Yuna learned through mutual acquaintances that his affair with Yoonji had not lasted long after the wedding scandal. Without the thrill of secrecy, their relationship had quickly soured. Yoonji had left him for a wealthier businessman, and Minho's company had suffered several setbacks, his reputation tarnished by whispers of his infidelity. Yuna felt no satisfaction at his misfortune, only a distant gratitude that she had escaped a future that would have been built on lies. The design business continued to flourish. Yuna had hired a talented team that allowed her to take maternity leave without the firm suffering. When she returned to work, it was on her own terms, with flexible hours that let her be present for Hana's milestones. She had learned that success did not require sacrifice of everything else, that a woman could build an empire and still be home for bedtime stories. Her latest project was perhaps her most meaningful yet, a foundation dedicated to supporting young designers from underprivileged backgrounds, the kind of students who had talent, but lacked the connections and resources to break into the competitive industry. The Kang Park Design Foundation, as they had named it, offered scholarships, mentorship programs, and internship opportunities. For Yuna, it was a way of honoring her father's memory, of ensuring that other young dreamers would have the chances she had worked so hard to create for herself. The foundation's first cohort of scholars had just graduated, and Yuna had watched with pride as they presented their final projects at an exhibition held in the renovated Kang Group headquarters. One young woman, A girl from a farming village in Giola province who reminded Yuna so much of her younger self had designed a community center that incorporated traditional agricultural motifs into modern sustainable architecture. Her work had already attracted the attention of several major firms. "You changed my life," the young woman had told Yuna after the exhibition, tears streaming down her face. "I never thought someone like me could do this. You showed me it was possible." Those words meant more to Yuna than any industry award or magazine feature. They represented the true legacy she wanted to leave behind. Not just beautiful buildings, but open doors and expanded possibilities. Jimin had been equally supportive of the foundation, contributing not just financially, but with his time and expertise. He sat on the board of directors, personally reviewed scholarship applications, and had convinced several of his business contacts to offer internships to the foundation's scholars. His involvement had initially surprised Yuna, but she had come to understand that charitable work fulfilled something in him that business success could not. It allowed him to use his privilege in service of others, to justify the wealth he had been born into by redistributing its benefits. One evening, as the family sat in the courtyard garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Yuna's mother arrived with a worn cardboard box. "I was cleaning out the storage unit," she explained, settling onto a cushion beside her daughter. "I found some things I thought you might want." Inside the box were relics of Yuna's childhood. School report cards covered with proud stickers, early drawings that showed the seeds of her artistic talent, photographs of her father carrying her on his shoulders at Everland Amusement Park, and at the very bottom, a small notebook filled with childish handwriting. "My wish book," Yuna whispered, recognizing it immediately. She had forgotten about this diary where she had recorded all her hopes and dreams as a young girl. She flipped through the pages, reading entries that made her heart ache with tenderness for her younger self. "I wish for a pretty dress for Chuseok. I wish Appa didn't have to work so hard. I wish I could design beautiful houses when I grow up." And on the very last page, written in the careful handwriting of a 10-year-old, "I wish I will find someone who loves me for who I really am, not who they want me to be." Tears streaming down her cheeks, Yuna looked up at her family. Her mother, who had sacrificed so much to give her opportunities. Her husband, who had seen past her shattered exterior to the woman beneath. Her daughter, who represented the future they would build together. "All my wishes came true," she said softly. "Every single one." Jimin took her hand, intertwining their fingers as he had done that first rainy night. Hana gurgled happily in her grandmother's arms, reaching for the golden leaves that drifted down from the maple tree. The moment was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, a perfect snapshot of the life Yuna had once dreamed of, but never thought she would have. The hanok had become more than a home. It had become a sanctuary, a place where tradition and modernity coexisted in harmony. Yuna had overseen its renovation herself, preserving the ancient bones of the structure while adding contemporary comforts. The ondal floors still radiated gentle warmth in winter. The paper screen still filtered sunlight into soft patterns. But now there was also a modern kitchen, where she and Jemin cooked family dinners, and a nursery decorated with traditional motifs where Hana slept beneath a mobile of paper cranes. They had begun a tradition of gathering at the hanok for holidays, filling the ancient rooms with laughter and conversation. Mrs. Kang would arrive with elaborate dishes prepared by the family's private chef. Sujin would bring her husband and their own growing family. Former colleagues and industry friends would stop by, drawn by the warmth and hospitality that had become the hallmark of the Kang household. But Yuna's favorite times were the quiet moments, when it was just her and Jamin sitting on the maru, the traditional wooden porch that overlooked the courtyard. They would talk about everything and nothing, making plans for the future while savoring the present. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other the rarest of gifts, complete acceptance. On the second anniversary of that fateful rainy night, Jamin surprised her with a book. It was a leather-bound volume with their names embossed in gold on the cover, and inside were photographs documenting their journey together. There was the picture from the design magazine article that had changed her career, snapshots from their first official date, when they had returned to the Pojangmacha where Yuna and Sujin used to go, images from their wedding, their pregnancy announcement, Hana's birth. Each photo was accompanied by handwritten notes in Jamin's elegant script, capturing the emotions and memories of each moment. "I wanted you to have something to show our children and grandchildren someday," he explained. "Something that proves love stories don't always start the way we expect. Sometimes they start in the rain, with two strangers who were brave enough to trust each other." Yuna held the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the thought and care that had gone into its creation. "I love it. I love you." She looked into his eyes, seeing reflected there not just the man he was today, but the journey they had traveled together. Every obstacle they had overcome, every moment of doubt they had conquered, had only strengthened the bond between them. "I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and for all the rainy nights to come." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender as it had been that first night when he had offered shelter to a stranger in distress. "You know, I never told you this, but that night I found you, I was contemplating giving up. My father and I had just had another terrible argument. I was wondering if I should just accept his terms, marry someone appropriate, become the heir he wanted me to be." Yuna's breath caught. "What changed your mind?" "You did. Your courage in the face of heartbreak. Your refusal to pretend everything was fine when your world had just collapsed. You reminded me that authenticity matters more than approval, that being true to yourself is more important than meeting others' expectations." He kissed her forehead gently. "You saved me that night, Yuna, just as much as I saved you. Some love stories begin with sunshine and happiness, but the best ones, the ones that last, begin in the rain. They begin with heartbreak and honesty, with two strangers finding each other in the dark and choosing, against all odds, to walk toward the light together." This was their story, and though it had begun with an ending, with the death of old dreams and the shattering of false hopes, it had become something far more beautiful than anything Yuna could have planned. It had become a life built on authenticity, on mutual respect, on the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing year. As she sat in the courtyard of her ancestral home, surrounded by the family she had created, watching her daughter take her first steps across the ancient stones, Yuna finally understood the truth she had been searching for all along. Happiness was not something to be found in grand gestures or perfect weddings. It was built in moments like this, ordinary and extraordinary, fleeting and eternal. The rain that had seemed like her destruction had actually been her salvation, and for that, she would be grateful for the rest of her days. This was their story, and it was only just beginning.